Maybe I was always destined to leave the church. I always had a hard time accepting even the most basic of Christian doctrines. Some of the most vivid memories I have of my childhood involve intense, not always polite discussions with my dad on confusing claims of Jesus' divine nature or the logical incoherence of the Trinity and the questionable authority of the Bible. You know, um, when did I have these discussions? I mean, it started probably in late elementary school, and my arguments only became more refined against Christian doctrine since then. I don't think it helped that I fell in love with philosophy. If anything, it just equipped me with insight into the depths of the problems with arguing both for and against God's existence, let alone anything else that the church wanted to claim about the Bible's authority or Jesus' divinity or just anything else. But to focus on these arguments really missed the real reason I left the church and why I shed any desire to remain in any Christian community or to call myself a Christian. See, to better understand my journey, we need to travel all the way back to the day I was born. Because, as a pastor's kid, I grew up in the church. I didn't just go to church on Sunday for a few hours. No, my whole life revolved around the church and the church community. I was at church on Wednesday evenings for midweek service. I was at church most Saturdays where it was if there wasn't some sort of church event, I was then accompanying my dad for preparations that he was making for the next day. Um, you know, when I was old enough, my parents would drag me to morning prayers like every weekday. Like it's like this weird Korean church thing that to go at like 5 in the morning to church and pray and have a mini service, right? Um, and my dad would hold like you know, family, what is it, Bible study on the days, and we didn't have any other thing that was going on at church. I mean, eventually they just kind of gave up on some of these things, but mostly it was because I just kept on insisting I didn't want to do it. Mainly because the time commitment was kind of getting ridiculous, I thought. Um, I've also mentioned that I would spend time with other pastors' families regularly. I mean, since I didn't really have many relatives in the US, these pastors, my dad's friends really, and their kids, they became my relatives. Like we just knew each other. And even if I didn't get along or weren't friends with the other kids, like we all heard stories about each other through our parents, right? Um, man, the summers were taken up by Bible study, VBS, like various other things that were going on through the church. My dad would also regularly drag me to these pastors' meetings because I guess denominations have their own like little gatherings where they talk about church stuff, I guess. And that happened every few weeks. I'm pretty sure he dragged me there just because he didn't want to leave me at home by myself. But you know, like I would just attend so many church centered things, right? So my entire family's life really was centered on the church. And though I didn't always like that reality, one thing was always true. Church in a way was home. And when we moved to Colton, it was actually our home in a way, right? The church actually purchased the sanctuary, but also the home next to it to serve as a home for the pastor, right? So my family lived in the home next to the sanctuary. Um, on those nights when I was feeling especially depressed or lost in life, um, often in a state of tears or just wanting to end my life because just things were just so hard, I would steal the keys to the sanctuary. I would just sneak in there and I would lay down on the pew looking up at the large cross in front of me, and I would just fall asleep. I would just fall asleep there. And I'm not sure why. I don't know why I felt so comfortable and at peace there, but that's what it brought me. It brought me peace. Um, Later in college, I continued to attend church. I mean, once I got to college, I mean, there was definitely nothing forcing me to go. My parents weren't going to have any say in whether I went to church or not. I didn't have to go. It was nice to sleep in. I mean, I was a college student, right? So, Saturdays often meant late nights. And then so Sunday, it was hard getting up in the morning. But I continued to attend church. You got to understand that at this point, I didn't really believe in the existence of God, any God, right? To be accurate, I was probably what you would describe as agnostic, right? I didn't know one way or the other, but I was definitely not convinced at the existence of God, and let alone a Christian one, right? So I was definitely against most of the teachings of the church, at least the teachings I've encountered in my own life and exposure to this, which is honestly mostly fairly socially conservative. At least my dad's circle of friends, they tended to be very doctrinal. They seem to be obsessed with the authority of the Bible and specific interpretations, honestly, of them. Um, like for instance, my dad's denomination was against like women serving as lead pastors, which disgusted me. The sexism in the church was appalling. I mean, just not just in theory, but also in practice, like the unfairness and the discrimination. Like I just remember even when I was young, I was just none of this made sense, and then I became more angry about it as I started encountering people who were directly affected by it. The churches that I often attended kind of not necessarily like explicitly, but left the responsibility on the poor and homeless to um, take care of their own situation as if they were somehow responsible for their own plight. And so, and I can't lie. There was the tinge of like, well, not a tinge, a lot of racism in a lot of these Korean churches that I attended, um, particularly directed at Blacks and Latinos. But honestly, it was a lot of bias against like darker skinned Asians too, right? Um, I couldn't understand how they could just throw the compassionate examples of Jesus out the door so easily. And of course, I had exposure to all the politics and corruption happening behind the scenes in the church, right? So I told you, like, my dad took me to all these meetings. I think parents need to understand that their kids probably understand a lot more than, you know, and are aware of a lot more than they think they are, right? So, like, my dad would take me and my brother to these meetings, and we were just left outside to play. But we could hear things through the doors and the walls. Like it's not as if they were particularly quiet at certain times, and also like it's not as if the walls weren't particularly thin. So you could hear what they're talking about, and I'm a kid, so I don't understand everything clearly. But from what I could gather, at least I knew that some pastors really did not like each other. I think it also helped that my mom was a gossip, so she would just spill the beans. I don't know if she did it intentionally or not, but she just spilled the beans on all this drama that was happening. Um, or like, I just learned about like high-ranking church members, like elders stealing money from the church or other shady activities. I do know that there was issues with like pastors vying for power within the denomination, and they were willing to say all kinds of nasty things about each other in order to secure it. I was exposed to all this, so like all this to say, like I had good reason to not attend church, but I still chose to attend church, and it wasn't out of habit; it was a conscious choice. I decided to do it. Um, it was actually the one I attended while I was in college was this church that was north of UCLA. It was one of my dad's friend's church. I have this sneaky suspicion that the parents wanted the kids to get married to one another because I always felt like uh, maybe not so much my parents, but the my dad's friend like they pushed their daughters like they treated me in a way where I felt very uncomfortable as if they were trying to set me up for something, right? With one of their daughters. Well, that's all speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some truth there. I would want to go for an interview at some point to find out what really happened. Um, but the church had this youth pastor who was, willing to actually pick me up every Sunday. Sometimes there were other students at UCLA that they would pick up, ones that, that grew up in their church. But he was willing to, it's a decent drive. It's in the valley. So it was like a good, like 20 plus minutes. Luckily on Sundays, there weren't really traffic. So he would pick me up and then drop me back off on campus. And, I think one of the reasons I kept on going was in part because of him, right? He loved to engage me, even though he knew my positions on all these things and how I often poked and prodded, like everything from the Bible and the church to like a lot of the practices or doctrines. Like we just went at it with one another, right? And I'm pretty sure he enjoyed these talks. He definitely did not shy away from it. And I think there was something about the fact that he was willing to engage me that meant a lot to me. Um, at times I would get frustrated for sure, right? Because sometimes, like, I mean, I'll be honest with you, completely irrational responses like just drive me up the wall. It just makes me go absolutely nuts, right? I mean, I'm a lot better about it now, but the fact that even the tirade Tuesdays exist tells you that I tend to sometimes be pretty vocal in my responses to things that I just don't think make any sense or things I disagree with. Um, but I remember, like, especially this one conversation we had about the importance of caring for the environment. And I was trying to come up with arguments that I thought would be convincing for him, right? So I was like, maybe the pragmatics of it, right? That there's a necessity in the long term for human survival that we need to start taking action now. This was back in like early 2000, 2001 or something like that, right? Um, or maybe like I was thinking, ooh, maybe I can take a biblical approach, right? And explain how it's kind of like a mandate of God to care for God's creation. This is part of human responsibility in the way that we treat animals and treat, like trees and rivers and all these other things, right? And I think when he would just completely dismiss it and try to argue that it was just merely some political issue and it's not grounded in reality, like he just denied the science of climate change altogether. I think that's when I just went nuts because I was like that you're just going to ignore, all of the studies that have been accumulating over until then, are you going to ignore all the people who are experts in this field? Like it just sounded ridiculous, his approach. I thought it was completely unreasonable, and I was just like would get so frustrated because it felt like reason didn't work with him, right? Um, Another time, I think we were arguing about the Trinity and how it just made absolutely no sense. And he was trying to give an explanation, but his explanation made absolutely no sense at all. Those were the worst kind of explanation. I was like getting frustrated because like you're not making any sense at all, like reasons. And it felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall. I remember one time he tried to like sun me and say like, something along the lines of like, oh yeah, like it's one of those things where like once you have faith and you're in it, then it all just kind of like makes a lot of sense and you could accept it, right? And I was like, no, that's the worst way to reason. That's not how to have a conversation with somebody and have a reasoned discussion back and forth, right? But even though some of these moments were really frustrating, they paled in comparison to the fact that I really appreciated that he was willing to have a conversation with me, right? He was willing to take that time out of his day, of his energy to like actually come all the way over to pick me up and to engage in these conversations. So I came to look forward to our drives to and from church. Um, Still, the truth was that I think I had a sense, I just felt like a kind of outsider at church. It was kind of weird because like I share with you that when I was a kid, I would go to the sanctuary. That was a place of comfort. It was a place of peace. It was a place where outside, regardless of all the politics, it's not as if I didn't know all the negative things about church. I just felt at home. Um, but I regularly felt like an outsider at church. And that feeling just kind of has been with me for just the longest time. I was someone who, for many reasons that I already laid out, probably should not have been attending church in the first place, yet I insisted on going. I mean, I didn't know exactly why then, but it's fairly clear to me now that there was a couple of things that I really was looking for, right? And one was that because church felt like home, I wanted to belong there. I wanted to be accepted and embraced like family. But I just didn't always feel that way because, well, my beliefs about the church or the doctrine or the institution or church history, right? Like these things all led me to have a lot of disagreements with pretty much anybody at church. Um, I became like the seed of discord, maybe. Additionally, I think there's something else I wanted in going to church, and that's really that I wanted the church to change. I mean, the reality was that I was aware of the history of Christianity at a fairly early age. My parents, I don't think they realized they used to leave me in the library in the summers because, they couldn't afford like childcare or they couldn't afford. So what they did was they just dropped me off at the public library at some point when I was old enough, and then they would just leave me there for like 8 hours, and then they'll come pick me up at the end. Like it's almost like the library became my babysitter. I remember my brother and I would just go through and just read through as many books as we can as a way to keep ourselves entertained. I mean, I'm talking back in the days when they didn't have computers there and everything, so it wasn't like I could play games. There's no cell phone. Um, the public library was far enough away that I couldn't like walk home, right? So um, I spent a lot of time reading, and one of the things that I ended up reading quite a bit of was a lot of biographies and um, books on history, encyclopedias. I ended up reading quite a bit. I just read because there was nothing else to do there, not because I particularly enjoyed it. Eventually, I enjoyed some kinds of reading, but even then, sometimes I needed a break from it, so I just read whatever was available, and I was exposed. I knew the history of Christianity, going back to the days of the way that Christians persecuted other religions, were persecuted in return, but also did the persecuting. But I was also particularly aware, because I read a lot of works on US history specifically, the role of the church, both good and bad, when it came to things like civil rights movement or the abolitionist movement or, you know, it just, let's be honest, it just wasn't always pretty. And that's kind of putting it mildly, right? The church was often the one enacting harm and justice and injustice. They were often siding with the oppressor, justifying things like slavery or Jim Crow laws. And um, I've already mentioned how my dad's church, like, they discriminated against women, which actually still happens in many churches today. Um, the church rarely seems to be at the forefront of bringing about justice. Uh, if it does, it's usually um, in the United States, anyways. It was like black churches, right? Or it would be churches that did not have the oppressive power uh, in that church, right? But generally, they were always against things like women's rights. Helping out immigrants, people of color, or even the LGBTQ community, right? These are all things that they've kind of fought against, at least in the US, at least. This is kind of the history of the church collectively. I mean, I can go on, but maybe because the church felt like home, I didn't want to just abandon it and leave it in the state that it was at. I wanted it to be better. I wanted for it to reflect what I was really committed to, what my dad in all his Bible studies and all my arguments with him kind of instilled in me, um, which was the search for truth and justice. Um, I still remember like the Bible studies I've had with him. I get into arguments with him about all this stuff, but at the end of the day, like the lessons that he really wanted me to take away from it, I mean, you could see it in his selection of Bible passages, but he would often read from Proverbs and um, Philippians and Ephesians, and he would read specifically these things, telling me that it's important to gain wisdom, right? And it's not so much the exact details of the what and when, and how. What was more important is gaining this wisdom and discernment to allow you to, apply it to living out a life that is aligned with the search for and the bringing about of truth and justice, right? So for these reasons, I didn't want to leave the church, even if I found myself frustrated with it. In fact, I even ended up going to Boston University for their theology program. I ended up going, I mean, who does this, right? I ended up getting a master's degree, not for any intellectual pursuit, not in the pursuit of a job. It was just deeply personal. I just felt so out of sync with the church and the church community as a whole and what they were doing in the world. Um, that I just wanted to find something, something to like make sense of this kind of disconnect that I was experiencing. And I spent time, energy, and some money to go ahead and pursue a full on master's degree, just so I could just dedicate specific years of my life to this search. Um, and for a while, I felt hopeful at Boston University. Uh, it was a program where, yeah, I personally was on the more, I guess the degree itself was much more on the intellectual side, but I was taking classes with future ministers, pastors from all over the world, right? From different denominations. Um, And though they didn't always agree on everything, they didn't always see eye to eye, I was just happy to find that there were at least some people who saw some of the things that I saw and cared about it enough to want to make the church a better place, or had a desire to bring about change. I actually have this wonderful memory of some of the Boston University students starting a pub church where on Sundays they hit the bars, right? And then they hold a service there. It was like a fun way to like brainstorm. When I remember like hearing them brainstorming that like, yeah, like instead of breaking bread, what we're gonna do is we're gonna break like chips or something, or popcorn or whatever they had at the bar. And instead of like wine, they would drink beer. And it's like Boston culture. They just love their beer, right? Um, but I love that they were trying to reach out to the people who were really having a rough time, right? Like where are you going to find people who are drinking away their life on a Sunday, right? I mean, you're going to find them at the pub, right? And they were wanting to reach people where they were at. And I thought that was so wonderful. Um, I also remember that during my time there, anyways, there was a deep division about how to view and whether or not to accept the LGBTQ community, with regards to, gay marriage, but also, ordination. Like, can you ordain, somebody who is lesbian or gay or, so on, and to accept them into the church full on, right? Like just make them a real member of the community, and accept them as they are. Um, what was, I mean, it was tense, it was uncomfortable, a lot of the conversations, but for me, anyways, regardless of how things played out, I was already comforted in knowing that there were actually so many other people fighting for the kinds of same things that I was hoping that the church would come to embrace, right? Like they would just actually understand that people who are gay and lesbian, this is not some like lifestyle choice or something, and they're like, sinning against God, and right, like there's a whole like set of beliefs that seem to go with their understanding of a whole community that is just like it didn't make any sense. And, I was glad to see that others were fighting for the same things I was fighting for. And that gave me hope, right? They gave me a lot of hope. Um, I think I also had a lot of hope from just encountering all these past pastors essentially who didn't keep me at an arm's length and just embraced me into the fold at the church in a way that I don't think I really fully experienced while I was here, even in light of all the things that I believed, that all the things I had doubts about. Like they had no qualms with my doubts and uncertainty and questions and agnosticism about these things, right? Like they were willing to just, and it wasn't some sort of like, malicious plan to like sucker me into something. They weren't trying to convert me and change my beliefs. They let me be who I was, and they still were willing to accept me. And that I think gave me a lot of hope, or at least at the time it did. One of them, even now a pastor in the suburbs of Boston, one of them even asked me to be the godfather to one of his kids. And it wasn't some sort of master plan. Well, maybe it was. Maybe it was some sort of master plan of his to um, try to plant some seeds in my head or something. But he would also tell me that I should be a pastor. He envisions me being a pastor. I wouldn't be surprised if he spent a lot of time praying that I become a pastor myself. Um, I I if you know my love hate relationship with the church, like it's not going to happen. Let me just shut it down, right? Um, but the hope that I got from my time at Boston, I got exactly what I was looking for in Boston. I had a sense of hope because I think the biggest thing for me was I just felt like if I was who I was, then there would be no space for me in the church. Um, if I was who I was authentically, there would be no space for me in the church. And when my time in Boston gave me hope that might not be the case, so that there might be space for me. And it carried me for a long time, right? When I finished up at Boston, I came back to California. I was a grad student at UC Santa Barbara, but I spent a lot of time in LA because I had friends there. But I also started attending a church in LA that was right up my alley, right? They were big on justice and serving the community. And so I loved being a part of that community and serving places like Lincoln Heights and later South Central LA, where there was a lot of, kids, a lot of families who were in need of just love, right? There was no trying to convince them of anything or converting anybody. It was just a way to extend love and grace and just honor humanity, right, to the fullest. And when I got married and moved over to Philadelphia for a while, we found a church there, um, that we became. I still have friendships there that I still stay in contact with. And when we moved back to California, we found a church in Orange County that became we became part of that community. Oddly enough, like at all these places, for some reason, like I tend to end up becoming friends with the pastors, like with the pastoral staff, right? Like, yeah, like the crew. I mean, that's, crew or clique sounds weird, but like the people that I got closest with while I was at all these churches. Well, maybe not in Philadelphia, but in Orange County, and then also back when I was in LA and everywhere I went, I just ended up becoming good friends with a bunch of pastors. Or if they're not officially serving as pastors, they studied theology. They were like about to be pastors, like they were like on their way to being pastors. Like they just seemed to gravitate towards that type, maybe. Um, Yet everywhere I went, I always felt kind of the same. Like I felt like, yeah, I'm a part of this group. I have some hope, but I still feel like I'm on the outside looking in. I never felt that same thing that I felt when I was younger, when I would sneak into the church alone and I just felt at home. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't really know why I was feeling the way I was feeling. Um, Even though I seemed to some degree, anyways, be kind of embraced at all these churches, wherever it is I kind of went. And I think it wasn't until years into therapy that I think things began to become a little clear for me. And the truth was, it wasn't the church. Like, there was nothing that the church was doing. It wasn't anything about the church embracing me. It wasn't about the church accepting me, but rather it was me. I was actually refusing this whole time to accept who I am, to accept that I believed what I believed, and that I cared about the things that I cared about. The truth is that I never accepted anything that would constitute me a Christian. I don't know what definition other people are working with, but um, you know, I didn't accept any of the doctrines. I was honestly critical of most of Christian history and its traditions. Right, I think most of the traditions are actually, appalling, or have roots in something that is, for me anyways, unacceptable. Hell, I'm critical of most churches, regardless of the denomination. I'm just in that place. Much of the things that churches are still debating to this day, honestly, were settled matters for me personally for a long time. Things like gay marriage and women in leadership and, um, you know, reconciliation over past wrongs by the church. I mean, it's, but it's also less so the beliefs, it's the practices, it's the living out of whatever it is. I don't know exactly what, because churches, just especially the Protestant church, this just fragmented in a lot of ways. There's just too many different groups moving in different ways. But at least the churches that I've been a part of, like, it just feels like collectively as a community, they weren't moving in the same direction I was. We didn't seem to have the same commitment. My commitment has always been to truth and justice. I think that it all just leads to the same place. Truth leads to goodness, and goodness leads to truth, and just we're all just moving in that same direction. That's where my commitment is too. And I honestly could care less whether it came from the church or elsewhere. And what I knew from my own experiences, anyways, that bothered me, that I wasn't willing to really acknowledge just how much it was bothering me, was that for me, anyways, the church always seemed to act in response to the world instead of initiating that change for the better. I never, like, take, like, for instance, like Black Lives Matter movement, right? Like, I didn't see churches at the forefront of it. I saw the churches as following along with it, right? Like, some of them might have participated, some of them might have opposed, but, you know, they, they just, I don't know, like, they just seem to be following along with something instead of being at the forefront of change. The fight against poverty, homelessness, right? Like, these things seem to be like the places, from everything I was taught from my dad, you know, and all those, like, family Bible studies, like, everything I was taught tells me that these are the places where the church should be at the forefront of demanding change to eradicate poverty through various tax policies, through whatever means necessary, right? To eradicate homelessness by, not allowing people to amass so much wealth, or to limit the houses that are being available, or, like, at least affordable housing, right? Like, find ways to solve these issues, that they should be at the forefront of these issues, but they weren't. In fact, most of the time it seemed like they could care less, until it was that time when for some reason they cared, which coincidentally often seemed to coincide with when the rest of the world seemed to care. Um, Again, like I'm not speaking on everybody. I'm just talking like collectively as a church, like as a larger body. Doesn't seem to be moving in the same direction, at least that I want to be moving. Um, and from my experience, all the churches that I've been to, it felt like I had to be the one to prompt the church to start a fight against injustice instead of the church prompting me. Um, Usually, if the church prompts anything, it's has to do with community building or finding ways to care for people within the church. These aren't bad things, but they are very inward focused, and that's just not me. That's never been me. My eyes were always on a bigger picture, um, a desire to kind of live it out in the world outside of the church. And like I said, individuals might have been working towards the same goal, but the church collectively, as I saw it, just wasn't, at least not to the degree that I was wanting. And more than anything, I was trying to make the church be something that it wasn't. If anything, I wasn't accepting the church for what it was. And I was wanting for it to be something that fit more of what it is I needed for me to be able to accept it. And so when I chose to just be honest with myself about where the church was and where I was at, the decision was fairly clear for me. And I made a decision to leave the church for good and to just shed any notion that I was a Christian in any sense of the word. And I just don't know how to explain how painful it is to say all this out loud. I still don't know exactly why it hurts so much. Maybe it's this feeling that I lost a home and all all the feelings that come with that, or if it's the sense that I lost a sense of myself. Maybe it's the realization that I just never had something that I thought I had, right? This place that a community, a home that I believed was something that I could be a part of. I don't know. Like, what I do know is that as crappy as it feels, as painful as it is, I do sense, I can feel it, that I am being more honest with myself. Um, and now I'm holding on to hope grounded in reality, just in some ways, that at least if I'm being honest with myself, I can make clear eyed decisions moving forward about what I want to do with my life. And real quick, uh, to Pastor Bob, I'm sorry, your dreams of my becoming a pastor, it ends here. I hate to burst that bubble for you, but I do promise that I will fulfill my duties as a godfather and guide your son to living the right kind of life, because that I do care about. And that's something that I hope the rest of the world does care about too.